I know we've talked extensively in the past about how a big aspect of the show is understanding the relationship with yourself, where it's the most important relationship to develop, but it's also the easiest to neglect, especially from the standpoint because we really never think in those terms. And I know three big things that we're going to be talking about today that go into that relationship with yourself, or a person's relationship with alcohol, their career, and also just talking about our physical body and our relationship with our body and how that plays into everything as well. And this is really cool because this is the first podcast I've done with somebody else where it's not necessarily me just interviewing them about their life and asking them very pointed, specific questions, but it's kind of just like a free going back and forth where I'll also be adding more info about my life, which I really haven't had the opportunity to do when talking with other people and other guests, which I think is great. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll push it over to you now, just like talking about alcohol, because I know for both of us, that's a really interesting topic. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are also interested in this topic of alcohol and their relationship with it
Yeah.
and how it plays within their environment as well. So I'll let you take it from here and just understanding
Yeah.
your relationship with alcohol over the span of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like we said before we got on the podcast, right? Like, I think it's something that people don't talk about enough. Um, I think it's really cool that you're like obviously starting the conversation, but like, you know, having it in a purposeful way. So I appreciate that. But I figured it would make sense. I mean, A, because I think you'll get a kick out of it, but also B, because I think it's like really relevant to why we're having this conversation. With like how I started drinking. And like, I know for a lot of kids, that's, high school, which is weird for me to say, right? Like for a lot of kids, they start drinking in high school, right? Which, is not legal, but, um,
Yeah,
right.
when I
Like
was thinking
I
about this conversation, like leading up to this, because obviously, like you were saying, like when you're in high school, like you think like, okay, like this is kind of what you do. But like now,
yeah,
as I'm 25, and
yeah,
when I'm thinking back, like, oh my god, like there's some kids who start drinking when they're like a sophomore in high school, and like you're 16
yeah,
years
like,
old. I'm like, that is absolutely wild.
yeah, no, it is crazy. And like, it's crazier to think about because like my first time drinking was literally in my own house. I had to ask my parents. I was like, "Can I grab?" I think it was a Keystone Light out of the garage. I don't know why we had Keystone Light, but right, like I was a senior, like senior fall. I was definitely one of the last ones in my group to drink, right, because everyone else had already started or was a pro at that point, and I literally just had one Keystone Light in my living room watching TV with my parents. I was like, this is pretty terrible. I'm not gonna lie, right? Like, I don't know why people drink this. And then, yeah, I mean, from there, it really just became more of like, all right, well, if my friends are going to do something social, there was always alcohol involved, right? I mean, even to this day, right? Like that seems to be the case. You mentioned you're 25. I'm 26. I'll be 27 here in a couple months. Like it seems to be something that like people don't, whether it's grow out of is the right word. I don't know. Um, but yeah, it seems to be a trend. I'll say that. So yeah, that's even why I'll just say like definitely appreciative that you're willing to talk about it and that you're open with it.
I mean, it's all relatively speaking because in the grand scheme of things, it's not like you were starting late by having
Of
it
course.
by starting drinking in
Yeah.
your senior year of high school. But if we're just talking within that like short time frame, why do you think the case was that you started that late? Do you think it was your parents or something else?
Um, I think it's a good question. I mean, for me, it was like I never really felt the need or urge. And like, I mean, you talked about it when you had my brother on, right? Like, you wonder how many athletes would have gotten to different points if alcohol just was never in the equation. And I think about that all the time, not just with me, but like guys I played with and against, right? Because it's such a major part of college. Um, and, the environment that people put themselves into, knowing that, yeah, it's going to be a big factor, right? But yeah, I mean, looking back, honestly, just it was more of a social thing, right? Like all of my friends at the time, a lot of them I'm still friends with to this day. You know, that was kind of just what was done in high school, right? Like Friday night, maybe Saturday night, you know, that was what was going on. Um, I don't know if it was the same for you, but yeah, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't think I had my first sip of alcohol until it was a graduation party for high school. And I think I had like a couple of sips. It wasn't even like a full
Yeah,
beer or a full drink. And it was kind of the same. Like at that point in my life, I was kind of just like, I don't need this or I don't have the urge for it. And I think also from my standpoint, being in high school, I really never even talked about drinking with my parents because both my parents really were never big drinkers.
yeah,
So I was never around it as a kid. So it was just never on my mind.
yeah.
And I was also at the standpoint, I've talked about this on previous episodes. I have three older siblings who are much older than me. So from the time that I was in sixth grade into, going into high school, I was the only one in my house. So it's not like I was around other kids within my house, or I didn't have siblings who were my age. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like, like when they started drinking, I was a very young kid. So obviously I wasn't going to be drinking with them. And I
Of
think that
course.
kind of just that same path continued through high school. And like I said, I think my parents, I mean, I definitely would have been allowed to go to parties, but I also
Yeah.
knew that, if I was going to be drinking or drinking regularly, I was like, that's just not going to go with
Oh,
my
yeah.
parents. Um,
Absolutely. And the same for me, right? Like it wasn't like, all right, like Chris, go have fun, go do your thing.
yeah,
Like it was, all right, right. Like you could go, but 10,
yeah,
10:30, 11. Like I'm picking you up and like I expect you to be in a state where,
yeah. So I mean,
everything's still
the
okay.
only party that I went to in high school was that first graduation party, and then
Yeah.
another like smaller graduation party after that. And I remember I was like thinking, I was like, man, like I kind of regret like not going to parties throughout high school. But then I was also like, I really didn't miss out on much
Hmm.
because I knew I was like, my parents are not going to be. I mean, I guess I can't say 100% like not going to be okay with me drinking because I never
Yeah.
asked them. But like, I feel like at that point in my life, I was like, I don't even want to talk about it because I feel like they would just be like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. But I think
Yeah.
there was real benefit to that. So it was always interesting in getting into the college aspect of things now. I was always curious to like know leading up into college before I actually got there because I always knew I was like, all right, drinking is a massive part of the college experience. And I was
Yeah.
like curious leading up to actually getting to school, like, all right, am I going to be like within that scene? Like, am I going to
Hmm.
be actively drinking, or am I going to be the type of person who was in high school or was like, like I just don't have the urge or the need for that?
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to know, like, from your perspective, when you got to college and you were also on top of that, you were a college athlete, you played baseball. Did you know, like, going into college, like, all right, drinking's going to be a big part of my experience?
Yes and no. I knew it was going to be part of the experience just from talking to people about, schools in general, taking my official visit, right? Like part of why I went to Holy Cross, aside from obviously it being a great academic school, a school where I could play baseball, do something I love, was it wasn't a huge, huge party school. And it wasn't like one of those massive schools where everybody is expected to, not expected to, but stereotypically, right? You show up Saturday for a tailgate, and that's just the sequence of events. Um, but yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be a part of it. I didn't realize how big a part of it was going to be. And I mean, yeah, like for me, I don't know. I never went in thinking it would be a big part of it, and then it did actually turn into like somewhat of a big part of really just building a team culture, which looking back is like it's I guess helpful in a sense, but in a way it's like a little odd. Um, like there'd literally be days where our coach would be, all right, yeah, go, you guys go do your thing tonight, like have fun, whatever, right? Like not insinuating, but everyone knew what he was talking about, right? And then we were just like had a later start time to the practice tomorrow, so like essentially built into our schedule as college athletes was that time, right? So it's a little odd. It definitely is. I would like to hear your thoughts on it, but it's definitely odd for me.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a college athlete, so I can't
Of course, yeah,
speak to that, but yeah, I find it so fascinating how it's just so deeply ingrained within the culture. And I can completely understand the brotherhood and the sort of the team building behind that. And that's something that I can also talk about later down in our conversation when we start
yeah, yeah,
talking about career stuff, because I can talk about it from that standpoint. But in terms of sports, I mean, I could totally see it from your standpoint, or if I did play college sports, of like, hey, this is something that I have to do if I want to be a good teammate and build that brotherhood, because you
yeah.
could make the case of like, this is going to make us a better team when we're playing.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like for me, looking at it, by no means was I like, all right, wow, I really have to go drink because if I don't drink, like there's going to be a huge lack of team chemistry, right? Like that was never exactly what was going through my head. But, right, like coming in as a freshman, wanting to compete for a spot, wanting to quote unquote be a part of the team when every other waking hour of the day is competing against these guys. Like, I want to beat them out for the spot. I want to compete just in general. That is really the time where it's like, all right, like we could bond, right? Like we don't have to be going at each other as much. So it is. It's interesting that that's like that, but it is. It's a big part of yeah, just the culture. I would say in general, and I'm sure like obviously we're saying it. I'm saying it right now as if it is this huge big thing, and it is, and it isn't. But I'm sure it's even more of a thing at bigger schools, which is exactly why I wanted to avoid that. Um, but it's definitely very interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Holy Cross as well. I was a year behind you, and
Yeah,
I think the biggest thing that drew me to Holy Cross, obviously I had a lot of family members go there, but I think the biggest thing that drew me was there just not being frats, because
yeah,
that's obviously the biggest component to it. I mean, my first school that I wanted to go to was Wake Forest. I badly wanted to go there.
mhm,
And once I got to Holy Cross and thinking about the entire experience of not getting into Wake Forest, I was like, you know what? Like, I think if I got into that school, there's a good chance that I would have maybe not regretted it, but I'm just feel like this isn't the place for me, because I knew that if I went to a school with frats, that's where I would have drew the line where I'm like, I don't want to be
yeah,
in a frat. Um,
yeah,
and with all this being said, because I feel like this can kind of come off as like we're just like bashing alcohol or bashing college, and like I drank all throughout college and have
yeah.
zero regrets, and I'm
No,
glad
same
that
here.
I did, because
Yeah,
I honestly think that, and everyone has to make their own decisions, but I honestly think that there's massive benefits in that you should drink throughout college, because I think it's just important to understand how you connect with people in that type of setting and environment. And obviously,
mhm,
that can lead to a lot of negatives if you're not
yeah,
controlling your relationship with alcohol. But I
Exactly.
think for most people, they are able to, and it kind of
Mhm.
sets you up for life after college where you can be like, all right, I had that experience and I understand what that type of life looks like in being in those types of settings. But
Mhm.
now I'm going to go down a different path after college with it.
Yeah. No, I think the big word there is control, right? Like being in control of your relationship with alcohol is a good way to put it. I think the perfect way. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, that's when there becomes a problem, right? Like people go overboard, um, they get carried away with the environment in which you're doing it, the goal of just drinking in general. I think that's when it could really take a turn. But yeah, I think as long as you're managing that relationship, there's nothing, nothing terrible that could come out of it. And honestly, like you said, in that environment, you know, you're 18, 22-year old kid, it does lead to some great times, right? Like you, I wouldn't have changed really much about my college experience. I had a great 4 years. I loved Holy Cross. Definitely don't want this to come off as like me bashing it in any way, shape, or form because I would go back in a heartbeat, right? But yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. If I had to relive my college years, I don't have any regrets of saying I drank, or I would say, okay,
Yeah,
I'm not drinking at all. Because I honestly think, I can say this very openly. Like, I think if I didn't drink in college, and it's interesting because you could say that's a bad thing, I don't think I would have made a single friend. Like, have
yeah,
had like an actual like close friend or like
yeah,
person that I'm connected with after school. And you can say, if you're looking at it from a macro standpoint, you could say, all right, that's a massive problem. And I could understand that.
yeah. No, I mean, look, I completely agree, right? Like 18 to 22-year-old guys and girls don't know how to socialize, period. Like, and
Yeah.
then I'll speak for, 26-year-old people, right? Like some 26-year-old people still don't know how to socialize.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that, I'm able to do that without alcohol. And I think a lot of people like yourself, like, a lot of people we're friends with are fully capable of that now. But I agree with you, right? Like if you just, as an 18-year-old kid, don't have that, I don't think, I mean, maybe it's our society. I think this could be a way bigger discussion, right? But like, I don't think a lot of 18, 19-year-old guys and girls are taught how to socialize without alcohol. Um, and so, yeah, I think, again, just as long as the control part is there, yeah, I think it leads to a lot of really close friendships.
Yeah. 100%. And I don't think it's necessarily even, and I talked about this with your brother, it's not the alcohol that you're wanting or losing, it's
Yep.
the social environment and the connections that you're able to make within that setting.
Absolutely. I would say it's that exactly. Plus just people being willing to like let their guard down a little bit,
Yeah.
right? Like everybody, I mean, especially today is like, I'm going to be judged for everything I do. And, you can't be silly. You can't make a joke, right? Like, I mean, for me, that was like the big thing in making friends coming into Holy Cross. I mean, my whole life really is just like having my sense of humor and like rolling with it, right? Like you might not like every joke that I say or whatever I say, right? But like 9 times out of 10, that's when like I've been able to find guys and girls who just enjoy, a laugh and like, I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, I think the most challenging thing for me when it came to drinking was going back and forth between summer breaks and college
Yeah.
because I'm a person who, outside of that college environment, I'm very rarely going to drink. It's just something that I don't do very often. So during those
Yeah.
summer breaks, it was like, all right, I'd be focusing on caddying and working
Yeah.
out and not drinking. And it felt like, all right, like I'm making like real progress here on
Yeah.
stuff that I take very seriously and love to do. And then it was like jumping back into that college environment
Yeah.
where I knew I'd be drinking. It would just be like very tough. And this is where I talk about like the relationship with yourself and being your most authentic self. To a certain extent, it felt like I was jumping back and forth between who I really was and sort of giving up a
Yeah.
part of myself to fit in, which I was fine with doing, but it was tough jumping back and forth between those two settings. And I know by the time senior year came around, I was like, all right, like it's time to get out of this setting. And I knew
Lock in.
like
Yeah.
I knew after college, I was like, you can kind of reinvent yourself. You're not necessarily going to be
Yeah.
around all the same people all the time. So it allows yourself to create new habits or just be a new person. So I knew after college, like, it was like, I'm going to be a person who's like, no, I don't drink. Like, I rarely drink. Instead of
Yeah.
kind of being like, all right, let me continue to fit into a certain extent.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest thing is just like doing it on your own time at your will, right? Like that's the thing that you can't really control in college is, I mean, you can control the environment. Don't get me wrong, right? Like me and you absolutely could have gone to the Holy Cross Hotel gym, like that little mirror room, right? And that's a whole different conversation. But at the same time, right? Like, yeah, you want to go have fun with your friends. Like, your friends are, you know, typically not doing that on a Friday,
Yeah,
Saturday night, and that's just college, right? And that's why, at least speaking for myself here, that's why I wouldn't have changed it. Because like, when else in your life do you have that, right? Like, you know,
exactly.
responsibility where you got to worry about something the next day. Like, no, it's just it's a different. It really is a different world.
Yeah. I mean, made a ton of great memories. And like I said, made a lot of great friends who alcohol was a main part of kind of building those friendships.
Yeah,
And the interesting thing for me also was because I studied abroad in Ireland, and I would say that was the really first time where the relationship with alcohol changed compared to college. Because when it was traveling through Europe, it was just a different mindset than being on a college campus
hmm,
or in a basement where it was like, all right, we're kind of drinking to become more integrated within the culture and going from bars to bars with also knowing like, all right, like we have to also be careful here. Like we're not, on a college campus where we're kind of
oh
just
yeah,
enclosed.
yeah,
And I would say like that was like really the first time in my life where I kind of like enjoyed the experience of drinking alcohol. Like I enjoyed
yeah,
drinking alcohol like on college campus, like it was a fun
yeah.
part, but it was just like a much more mature way of going about it.
No, I think that's honestly, I think that's a big part of it. Like you mentioned before, right? Like your relationship with alcohol. I mean, like my fiance Maggie always was like, you need to enjoy, right? Like it's about enjoying it. It's about just like allowing yourself to not be so pressured by what's going on around you. Just kind of roll at your own pace, if you will. And yeah, I feel like that's probably more the environment. I've never been to Ireland. I hope to go. I've heard great things, but like, I feel like that is the environment, like you said, when you're removed from that college environment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just another big thing that needs to be stated, just like saying like, because neither of us are like anti-alcohol, like
Yeah.
my main mindset and way of life is live and let live. And I've told people this, like, live and let live. Like, I'm not pushing a certain way of life or saying, like, oh, you need to be eating this or like you shouldn't be drinking alcohol. It's like, let me live my life the way I think is best for me to live, and you can make
Yeah.
decisions and think the way that you want to think. Because I think that's one of the, I think that's the main reason why this like non-alcoholic lifestyle hasn't gained like a lot of hate, is because I think it's like a
Yeah.
lot of people who are just doing it for themselves and they're not pushing it on to other people. Because I think it's
Yeah.
like really funny when you look at other stuff like, you know, like CrossFit or like veganism. I feel like the reason why that gets like joked about is because people are like constantly like on the front line saying like, oh, like I'm a vegan, like this is like you should be vegan as well. And I feel like with alcohol, like the reason why it hasn't gotten like that, at least from my perspective, is because people are just living that way for themselves and they're
Yeah.
not pushing it on to other people.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's a good point, right? Like, and I do want to get, because this got me thinking about your word that might make it to the dictionary, personomy. I want to get there at some point, but I think it kind of relates to that, right? Like, in a way, like that whole movement of just like taking care of yourself, what you want to do for yourself doesn't need to be talked about, right? Like, it's for you, for that person, right? So it's like there is no need to push it, because it's for no one other than you. And I like that, like live and let live. I think that's great. I think if more people live like that, there would be a lot less problems. Um, but yeah, I think that's a
Yeah, I
great
mean,
point.
I think that's the thing that I've struggled with the most with not being the biggest drinker or at this point in my life, like rarely drinking, is having people tell me basically like, oh, like what's the matter with you, or what, you know, why don't you drink, or you know that, you know, like that's not what the rest of us do, like do what the rest of us are doing. And I always try to, I guess, bite my tongue to a certain extent, because I just think in my head like live and let live. Like I'm not
Yeah,
telling you that you should be living the way that I live, you know,
yeah,
like you do your thing. Like I completely understand somebody wanting to have an active relationship with alcohol. I see no problem with that. It's just from my perspective, I'm like, all right, this isn't something in my life that I'm regularly
yeah,
going to be doing.
absolutely. No, and I think the last thing I'll say is just like I think all of that, like the pushing, mainly with alcohol, comes from like an insecurity, right? Like if
Yeah,
someone can't enjoy a drink, two drinks, whatever it is that they want to enjoy without making you or whoever it is that they're surrounded by feel like they have to do that too, to me that's just like the biggest, you might as well like put a sign on your face that just says like I'm extremely insecure about what I'm doing right now, like just stop doing it then, right? Like that's what it says to me. I could be misreading that entirely, but in my experience with it, that's exactly what it is. And I have gladly at this point in my life no problem saying like I'm great actually, thanks, like, but enjoy it,
yeah,
like
100%.
you got to do things on your own time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that ties into the career aspect now, because like I said earlier, I think when you leave college, it allows you to reinvent yourself to a certain extent. And I think that's really important once you become a professional,
Yep.
because I knew when I started, my first job was working in commercial real estate in New York City. And I made it up in my mind. I was like, from a social standpoint, like, I was just going to say, like, I do not drink, because I wanted to put a hard line in the
Yeah,
sand of like,
you kind of have to.
like this is not what I do on a regular basis, because I knew if I wasn't true to myself, because that was the biggest thing. Like getting back to the relationship with yourself is the most important
Yeah,
to develop. I was like, all right, in college, it felt like I was neglecting myself a little bit, or I was gonna, you know, play into the group a little bit and have that be a part of my who I was as a person and drink. But
yeah,
after college, I was like, no, like that's being cut off.
yeah,
And I feel like I found a new sense of confidence within myself. and it could be
Totally.
tough at times. But like I talked about with your brother as well, I think if you do it a certain amount of times, it gets easier and easier, and you kind of play into being the one who does his own thing,
Yeah.
and that just further increases your confidence in yourself and making decisions for yourself.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think when it comes to building that relationship with yourself, it's about boundaries for me. Like, I mean, I just started a new job in the city, and I would say a lot of the social aspect of that job is outside of work events where, when I would say, no, I'm not going, or, go and not drink, there'd be other people there who are not drinking too. But, the expectation at those types of events, which I know you've talked about, is, yeah, like you're going to drink, right? Like that is how to be social. And I think, I mean, again, for me at this point in my life, I'm not saying I'm a grandpa, right? I'm 26. I'm still going to enjoy, a beer or a wine, like glass of wine or whatever when I want. But after you know, a long day of work or, whatever, commuting into the city and home, like I don't really want to go drink with my coworkers. Like we've had all day to grab a coffee and be social or go grab lunch and be social. Like this is for me, my boundary, and I'm going to set that. And I think that's been huge for me. I think it goes beyond just obviously alcohol, but like one thing over the past couple of years for me that has helped me a ton is setting boundaries. And I think maybe you talked about it with Joe. I'm blanking a little bit, but the ability to say no is huge there. And it's something that I did not learn soon enough. But when you learn that, I think you touched on it. It's like this whole new confidence that you get.
Yeah, it's very challenging at the start, but like I said, the more and more you do it, the easier it becomes and the more confident it becomes. And also from, I think, looking at it from other people's perspective, they start to just see you as that true version of yourself, which I think is
Yep.
the biggest goal. Where if you're putting out a fake version of yourself, or if you're wavering and, like you said, not setting those boundaries that feel most true to you,
Yep.
people are going to see that fake version, and they're just going to be interacting with that fake version and thinking and talking like you are that fake version, which is not what you want to do.
Yep.
And getting more so into my perspective from the career thing, I always had the understanding, I think, from pretty early on that I wasn't going to feel fully integrated onto my team. And
Yep.
this is tying back to you in baseball. I was on a very small real estate team. It was probably like 12 or 13 people. And it was like a sports team, basically.
Yep.
And I knew that that social environment, those social settings, those parties, those drinking occasions were real team building activities and really becoming a brotherhood. And I understood that, yeah, I'm on the team, but I'm not like fully on the team. And I actually think that David Goggins talked about that in his first book, where he said like he was a Navy SEAL, but he wasn't a part of the SEALs because of
Mhm.
not playing into that drinking culture. And that was something that I always struggled with. I left real estate because, that just wasn't the path for me from the standpoint of the work. Like I really didn't
Yeah.
enjoy the work, and I knew it wouldn't be a full-time career for me. But I
Mhm.
also knew that, like a secondary reason was like I'm never gonna fully like be on the team, which I think a lot of people struggle with within their career if they don't necessarily fully buy into the social aspect, where they kind of want to keep life and work separate. It just
Yeah.
becomes very challenging if you don't buy into that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think like the overarching theme here, at least that I'm hearing, and that, you know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it too, is just like building a culture that people feel like they could go and be as successful as they know they can be in. Like, I don't know if that's too much of me extracting, right? Like a deeper meaning, right? But like for me, I mean, you reference a sports team, right? Like I look back at like my time at Holy Cross and my 1 year at Richmond and like being at EY for the start of my career, liking certain parts, not liking certain parts, going to a startup, right? Um, and now being back at a bigger company in JP Morgan. I think it all comes down to like what culture is built at the top that allows you to feel, you know, capable to do what you need to do and not conform to what is being almost built in a way. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I would like to
No,
hear your thoughts on
100%.
it.
I think that is 100% correct, where whatever's happening at the top kind of trickles down. So whatever type of environment the top is building, like that's what it's going to be. And
Yeah,
if those people at the top have that big social aspect, and drinking is a big part of how they build culture, then that's kind of what it's going to be, trickling all the way down to the bottom. And I also knew from like the standpoint of drinking, or this was just my opinion on things, that I wouldn't have been as successful in the real estate business because I didn't have that big social component, big drinking component to me.
sure.
Where, when you're in social settings, business gets talked about as well within that. And I knew that that was probably going to hold me back. And I was also looking at it from the standpoint of my team, where, well, if this is going to hold me back, it's going to hold the team back as a whole.
Yeah,
So it's probably best that I leave than hold both of us back, because that wouldn't be
yeah,
good for any of us.
yeah. No, I think that's a super fair way to look at it. And like one of the questions I had for you, because you know you're still obviously in the startup world, is like what aspect of being in that world do you appreciate? You know, having been in an environment and on a team where it wasn't really your speed like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting from two different standpoints. One, because it's fully remote. I feel like, and this is the only remote, I've only had two jobs. I've had one in person job and I've had one remote job. So I can't compare one remote to another remote and one in person to another in person, but
Mm-hmm.
just comparing them, one to another, I think it's super, super challenging to build a culture within a remote setting where you're not in front of people physically on a daily basis.
Yeah,
And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because it's a good thing because I think it allows you to build an individual culture where, like,
yep,
all right, like who I am as a person, like that's going to be the culture for my company, basically, from a standpoint like that.
yeah,
And it also helps from a social standpoint where, like, okay, if we're not always going to be around each other, there's not that pressure, or there's not that sort of like feeling on the outside looking in from everyone else. And also, the industry that I went into, I knew I wanted to be more so within the fitness, health and wellness, sports space. And a big part of that was because obviously that was what I was most interested in. And it was also because I was like, all right, I want to be around other people who
yeah,
have these same type of interests.
yeah,
And I think when you are around the people with the same interests, a lot of the time those interests also just play into way of life and how you live your
Yeah.
life.
Yep.
So I naturally found that the people that I'm working with in this startup scene, and it's a startup in one aspect of the business, and another aspect of the business it's, like
Yeah. Yeah.
fully mature. But like the people that I'm working with, I'm like, all right, like similar interests, similar way of life with health and wellness, and I hate using the word like clean, but like just like more, you know,
That's,
appreciative of, what they're doing with their body and their
yeah.
mind.
No, I think clean is a totally fair word there.
Yeah. So I mean, it was interesting because that was the biggest thing for me where and I think that's the biggest thing for anyone's career where it's like I want to be around the like-minded people who are
Yeah.
have the same interests and are growing in a place that I also want to be growing. With
Yep.
that being said though, the only one bad component of the real estate was sort of like that social setting, like, work hard, play hard environment with drinking.
Yep.
Like take that away though, like the people that I was working with, probably like the hardest working people
Oh yeah.
I'll ever meet in my entire life. Like
Yep.
to a certain extent, like I still look at my bosses that I worked with in
Yep.
real estate. I still see them as like my bosses. Probably like I'll probably feel like that for like my entire career.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always think to myself, like in certain situations that I'm in now in my job, like, all right, like what would they do in this situation?
Yeah. No, I mean, a couple things. Um, the first being, I mean, I agree with everything you said. One takeaway that I had in my head was, right, like the more people treat themselves with respect, and you hesitated to use the word clean, I like that word, the more they are going to treat the people around them with respect, right? And like, I mean, I've had one job where it was hybrid, mostly remote, but yeah, still enough in person where I got to observe people, learn from people. Another job for a year where I didn't work together with anybody in person at all. And then now a job where I'm in the office next to my entire team 3 days a week and then remote the other two. And I think the biggest thing there is you could absolutely see the difference. I mean, I could tell you in past jobs and my present job, right? Like this person is 100% taking care of themselves, and you could just observe it in every detail of their work, their responses to questions, how they communicate on a call. I mean, I'll give you this one example. There's this guy I work with, one of the hardest working people. He's not even my direct boss, but like you said, right? Like just one of those people where it's like, wow, okay, like that's a standard I want to hold for myself, right? And it's like you could just see he takes care of himself so well that like he literally comes to work and almost has to take care of other people at times, right? Like it's the truth. It's how people operate, and it's like in a sense the plain reality of it is like the more you're able to take care of yourself, and I heard this on like a sales podcast, the more you're able to take care of yourself, the more you're able to take care of your clients, right? So like if you're in the sales world, if you can't even take care of yourself, your person, what makes you think that you are going to serve other people and their business as well, right? Like that's just delusional. Um, and that's an aspect of business that I really enjoy is sales, business development, right? Like building those relationships. And yeah, I mean, I would encourage people if they're just starting their careers to just like take notice of the top people in whatever the function is and how they act, and if they could tie that to like, you know, habits they form in their daily work. So I don't know. That was just some
Yeah, I
things,
think I saw
thoughts.
an article on this a long time ago in the Wall Street Journal, and it's awesome. there was this boss who, I don't know if it was people, probably wasn't people that he was interviewing, but like recently hired, or people who he was working with. He would be like, let's go get a workout in. Like in business, the big things are, let's go out for drinks, let's play a round of golf. But this
Yeah,
guy was like, let's go get a workout in. And I think it's so fascinating because you can tell so much about a person if you get them into that type of environment where
yeah,
if they're doing something a little physically demanding, a little uncomfortable,
yeah,
you're going to find out really quickly, like, all right, how does this person respond to this type of stress?
yeah,
And like you were saying, people who take care of themselves and they push themselves very hard in some type of physically demanding activity and are very healthy, they're much more inclined to be able to deal with that type of stress in their career where they're just used to it. It's like, all right, this is something that we just deal with. And
yeah,
I think certain people kind of play into that and really like it actually, where they like a little chaos or they feed into that and it
yeah,
energizes them a little bit and it sets themselves apart from other people.
yeah. No, I completely agree. And it is something that I've noticed at bigger companies, right? Like more people, I don't want to say get away with that, right? But like more people get away with like living that chaotic life within. Just because I think they know they can, right? Because for me, right, like my experience at a company like Ernst and Young or a company at like JP Morgan, right? Like the culture is just, you know, if you get told to do something, you are doing it, right? There is no like, oh, like you have this skill, I have this skill, we could work together, bash this out in like 2 minutes. It's no, like, I just got to sign this, I need to do this. And like, a lot of the times, right, like that might not even be the best move, but it's just how it works, right? So I agree with everything you just said. Yeah, it's interesting to me because environment is everything. So yeah, I just and I'm big on development. I know you are too, but like as I develop in my career, like I just take these mental notes of like this is how I want to do things when I get to this point. Like when I'm leading a team, this is how I want to do X, Y, Z. And yeah, I've enjoyed doing those kind of mental sessions.
Yeah, I think touching on the environment thing, I think environment is so massive. Like when I was in real estate, being in that environment, like I would bring my meals to the office every single day. I'd bring my gym bag, and that was
Yeah,
looked at kind of as, oh, that's different. Like nobody
yeah,
else really does that. But it just goes to like if we were in an environment where there were 9 or 10 people like me doing that, and 1 or 2
exactly.
people who weren't doing that, then it would be like maybe those 1 or 2 would be like, you know what, I should maybe get on that type of program. So it
Yeah,
just goes to the numbers. And if you
yep,
can be that person, and I remember telling myself this, like, doesn't matter, especially after college, like, it doesn't matter what the environment is, like, the environment is yourself. Like, that is your
yep,
environment. Like, what do you want to do? Like, what is your mind telling you that feels like most authentic? Like, it doesn't matter what other people are doing around you. Like, you are your own environment. And you could, and the way that I also look at it is like, if I'm gonna set the standard like for myself as a person, I always think of myself now like maybe there's another person like that because I was like that to a certain extent. Like maybe there's another person like that around me who wants to do that but doesn't have the confidence or the
yep,
courage to sort of step out and do what they truly want. And that's
yep,
what I always say now, like being your most authentic self, you're not just doing that for yourself, but like you're doing it to give people the okay and like the keys to do that for themselves as well. It's like, hey, I'm doing it for me. Like, it's okay if you do it for yourself as well.
yeah. No, I completely agree. And like last thing on that, I would say is you said right, it's a numbers game, right? Because it really is. I love, I mean, I love like just underdog stories, underdog mentality, all of that. But like being that one and being able to like literally convert people to your side of like
Yeah.
just having that mentality, I think is like super powerful. Um, I think it's definitely something that obviously like the outworker speaks to as a whole, but just that we both do, just like in what we get involved in.
Yeah, going off that with the outworker, I mean, like the deeper meaning behind that, just like the outworker, what that's synonymous with is basically just like the individual. Like
Yep.
be yourself, like be the individual, like be the one who isn't afraid to go against the numbers because it's so easy just to stay within that crowd. And I think that's one of the benefits to a certain extent of college is kind of you play within that crowd and you kind of understand being within that social setting and doing what other people are doing. So you kind of understand that environment of things. And once you learn being in that environment, I feel like it allows you the courage or more so like the confidence of like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, let me do
Yeah.
my own thing.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And like I know I mentioned this before, but I honestly do think like you have a shot at getting this in the dictionaries personomy. Like I never thought about it like that, right? And you said Warren Buffett, right? The biggest investment you can make is an investment in yourself. And like if you actually take time to think about that, right? Like, I mean, I've worked in, I mean, I work in the financial services industry right now. I worked in it a year and a half ago when I was at EY, right? Like companies spend all this time, all this money on evaluating companies, which big picture, just groups of people following a process, right? And no one really takes that time to evaluate, okay, like this section of my life is like if it was a stock through the roof, but like this section not at all, right? And so just investing that time, because as an individual that's really all you like, the choice you have is invest more time in this part of your life. It couldn't be more true. So I think that's like, I mean, A, I don't know how you thought about that, but like B, it's awesome and I love it. So
Few things going off that. I guess one, how I thought about it. I feel like I've just become a much more intellectual person, and
yeah.
especially with being an English major, I think that's helped with that. And for people that don't know, or just to give them like the background on it, so personomy is basically just combining two words with person and economy, where it's basically like you're investing in yourself. And I think part of the reasoning why I was able to come up with that word or understanding behind it is because when I was like a young kid, my dad always worked in finance, and he would get me certain things like, he hired a personal trainer for me or getting me a new book or whatever it is. And he would always tell me in like in a very serious fashion, he's like, I'm investing in you. Like he saw me kind of
Yeah.
like as an investment or like putting things in those terms, like, I'm buying this for you, or I'm getting this certain thing for you, or I'm putting you through college because I see you as an investment. And I think if you have that mindset, one from the standpoint of, all right, the things that I'm doing are to invest in myself, but also having that sort of like long term mindset on things where,
Yeah.
hey, the stuff that I'm going to be working on right now isn't going to be paying off, but it's like compound interest, like it's going to take off over time. So I think
Definitely.
that's sort of like the background of how I came up with that. And that's actually like, and like you said, or probably like you heard, when I mentioned personomy, like that was one of the other names that I thought about calling the podcast, like the personomy podcast.
Yeah.
I just went with outworker because I don't know, that just like resonated with me more. And I feel
Hmm.
like I wanted to choose a word that was already like made instead of like personami, but like personami is a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
cool word.
I think it's an awesome word. And like going off of, because I was listening to the first episode where you kind of talked about this stuff. I think another potential name that you had in there was athletic, right? Like
Yep.
you said, having the drive to pursue constant improvement and how we're all athletes. I think that just couldn't be more true. I don't know if this is like our pivot to mindset in the
Go there.
conversation, but like, I don't know. For me, yes, like as a former athlete, I think, like you said, we all are, but it's just life. Like, life is quite literally, I mean, whether you buy into it or not, that's your choice, but like, can you develop yourself over this extended period of time, right? And like, how seriously you take that determines a lot. And I mean, I go back to, I know I joked about it, right? But like the Holy Cross Hotel Gym, right? Like we had that one 10 by 10 room with like, it's basically like someone's garage gym for an entire student athlete or, student body population. And
3,000
like,
kids for one little
yeah,
box.
for one little, yeah. And for me, that was like, all right, like I kept seeing you in there, obviously and naturally. And I was like, I mean, if this is where I keep seeing Tim, like he's got to be serious about it. Like there's no other way to put it, right? Like if you're in that room with that one set of weights and those three benches at the right time where no one else is in there, like you got to be pretty serious about it. So I think in general, right, like we both just have a pretty similar mindset when it comes to like how hard we're working and like where we see ourselves going, but also just like yeah, the comparison to being an athlete really stuck with me, and I love it.
Yeah, I think the thing also with athletes, and I guess my mindset with that name, and that could be a great brand in itself, athletic.
Yeah, should get
People would
some
always, from my own
rights on that.
perspective, people would always, ask me because, I've always been big into weightlifting. And I feel like I always lived like an athlete. I always had like an athlete mindset. I played sports in high school, but then I stopped. And people would always tell me or ask me, like, oh, like, you must have played college sports. Like, what'd you play? And it was like,
Yeah,
no, like, I just work out a lot. And that's where athletic comes from because I'm like, being an athlete is, like you said, it's a mindset, and you do not have to play a sport to be an athlete in that sense.
yeah,
And I talked about this in the first episode. We have such a romanticized, glorified look at athletes because we see them 1% of the time
yeah,
when they're on the big stage, spotlight's on them, they just won a championship or whatever, and they're playing their games. And it's like, all right, you take the camera away, like the other 99% of what they're doing up until that point where they're actually playing, like you can be doing all of that stuff. Like you can be doing 99% of the stuff that a world class athlete is. It's just like the only thing that you're not going to be doing is playing the actual game. And
yeah,
the other aspect that really came from that name was Bill Bowerman, who was one of the founders of Nike. It's one of Nike's, founding slogans from the start. If you have a body, you're an athlete. And it just gets
yeah.
into that mindset of an athlete is just another person. Like there's nothing special about them. They're just putting in the work and you can do the same as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like I've had like I've played against and played with like guys like I'm sure you know Declan Cronin, right? Like Holy Cross guy. Talk about like I mean, we could talk about this whole podcast with Declan Cronin, right? But like, especially alcohol, right? Like, great example of why you don't need it and how, I mean, that guy was in the
He never
library
drank.
at midnight. He would drink occasionally, right? But like, talk about having boundaries and knowing exactly what he wanted and where he was going, right? Like, I mean, he was the hardest worker, right? Like, that's his brand, right? And it's proven out, right? Like, that's exactly what he is and what who he is and what he does. But right, like it just all comes back to, for me, what you said, what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. And I was curious what those three things meant to you. That was like my one question I had for you.
What were they? Who are you?
So, what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. So, like for you, what are your goals? Like, how are you planning on doing that? Loaded question. And why are you doing that?
So you're gonna have to tell me this again, but I'll start with the
Yeah, yeah,
what.
yeah.
So, and this is also a big component, sort of, I guess, philosophy behind the word outworker
Hmm.
and just my component of outwork. So I've basically taken my mindset and I think the results that I've achieved through working out. And I'm like, all right, let me take that philosophy and just bring it into other aspects of my life.
Yeah,
So I don't know if you've heard the term, you probably have, but like with working out, progressive overload is
oh yeah,
basically you're trying to do more weight or reps or sets than that previous workout.
yeah,
And I'll make this a long story because I don't care. It's my
yeah.
podcast. I'll
Why
make it
not?
as long as I want. But like when you're talking about working out, like obviously, like when I was in the gym, like I had goals of, all right, I want to be as big and strong as possibly can. Like I want to, I want to, focus, on putting this much amount of muscle on. Like I want to have like, a 275 bench or whatever it is, or like just having those
Yeah,
type of like physical goals. Like when I was young, like I was always like, all right, like this is where I'm trying to go. Like I'm always like, I'm trying to get over there. And as I got older, and I feel like I had like a really good plan in place and system in place where I was like, all right, like here are my workouts, like here are my meals that I'm eating on a daily basis. My mindset completely shifted from not even focusing on where I was trying to go or, what I was trying to do, like what I was trying to achieve,
yeah,
but just beating or staying consistent with what I was doing the previous day. So in life, I would say like, yeah, I have big goals where, I have big professional goals with my career and hopefully with this podcast down the line,
yeah,
potentially
yeah.
with this creative, project that I have going. Like obviously I have goals with that, but like my
Of course.
mindset is completely fixed on what did I do yesterday? Am I staying consistent with that? And am I
Yeah,
beating what I did yesterday? And just in terms of the podcast, I feel like that philosophy is already starting to prove right where I'm not trying to focus on where I'm going. I'm trying to just focus on what I'm beating yesterday. Because
yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, that's all I can really control. Like,
Absolutely.
and I talked about this yesterday actually with somebody, and you put it into the definition of, what are your goals? And
Mhm.
I would say I'm of the mindset now where I'm not trying to find a goal that I want to achieve. I'm trying to find a game that I want to play
Sure.
because I think when you have a goal that you're trying to achieve, like I said, you're constantly thinking about like, okay, what am I doing now because I want to get over there? Like, where am I trying to go? With games, I feel like games are fun. Like both of us have played games, whether it's sports or video
Yeah.
games. Like when you're playing a game, you like, I love what I'm doing in the moment. Like
Right
I
now. Yeah.
love the work that is going into this right now. Like games are fun. And when I was working in real estate, I learned I was like, this doesn't feel like a game to me. And for other people, it did feel like a game. So I'm like, I'm probably going to be beat by people that this feels like work to me, but it feels like a game for them. So this
Yeah.
probably isn't the profession for me.
Yeah.
What was the second one?
Yeah. So first off, I love that the mindset of like making it a game. Gonna have to try that. Second is how do you plan on getting there? But I think honestly, like you kind of covered that. Unless you want to obviously go and
No, I think that plays into it as well. And I've talked with other people about this. Like I had a guy on, Graham Betchard, who was the sports psychologist, and he said the same thing. He's like, I'm not even focused on where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to be here because here is going to take me to a place I want to go. Like I'm not focused on where I'm trying to be, focusing on where I am now. And if I just focus on the now, that's naturally going to take me to a place that I'm probably going to like, that I'm going to be.
yeah, I really like that. And so
It's
he's a
challenging though.
sports.
It's challenging. Like because I can talk about that and say I do that 100% of the time, and I think I've definitely gotten better at that over the years. But it's obviously tough not to have your mind wander or always feel like I'm trying to be in a different spot than I am now.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
And then what
yeah,
was the
and
last
then the
one?
last one was why do you do it? And I think this is kind of driving at like maybe those bigger goals that you referenced with like the podcast and just professionally.
Yeah, I mean the why is always so fascinating because I feel like it always changes, because there are some days where I ask myself like, why do you work so hard, or like why do you do this stuff, where I'm like, you could. And then there are other days where I'm like, why do you have this sort of like drive to have these sort of creative entrepreneurial endeavors when
Mhm.
you could just focus on, a corporate career and like staying in real estate and just going down that path. And there'd be a lot of days where I would like really try to, I don't know if convince myself or like just ask myself like very deeply, like, why can't you love this path that you're on? Because I'm like, I could see, I'm like, this is a great path. Like, this could be, I could be very successful at this. I have all the skills for it. I have the mentorship and the environment around me. I can make a ton of money at it, but it just wouldn't be that fulfillment.
Yeah,
And I feel like the why for me, it's tough to put it into words. And I feel like your brother had the same thing, where he said it's not always easy to put it into concrete words. It's just kind
of
of a
course.
feeling.
I
And
get it.
for me, I guess I would say two different things. The why for me is like, I guess just talking about the podcast, like I've found like I just love having deep conversations with people,
Yeah.
and just, but that also gets into the feeling aspect. Like, and just I feel it right now with having this conversation with you and with other people as well. Like the energy and the drive that I get, it is a very
Yes.
similar feeling that I get when I have a really, really good workout.
I
And
was
I'm
about to,
like,
that came right out of my head. Like, not to cut you off, but right, like having these conversations is like the workout for, in
yeah,
my opinion, the workout for your, not only your
100%.
plans, but like your vision. And I mean, for me, vision is huge. Like you could talk about, LeBron James, Steph Curry, like any elite athlete having court or field vision, right? But like in my mind, that is absolutely translatable to any other non-professional athlete navigating their life, their
Yeah.
career. And I think these conversations are kind of like a workout for that skill because not
Yes.
everyone has that skill. And I think it's a super valuable one.
Yeah.
So,
100%. Yeah. I mean,
but
I
sorry.
talked about that sort of, actually, yeah. I mean, I went pretty in depth. I guess I went pretty in depth about the why behind starting the podcast. I guess not the why behind all my goals, but
Mhm.
like you were saying, I think you need some type of activity that you do on a regular basis that is going to make you work physically. So, running, working out, anything like that.
Yeah,
And I think all of us need some type of creative project that we can also sink ourselves into that are going to challenge us mentally, creatively, emotionally. And that doesn't have to be something that you share with the world. That can be something that you just do with yourself. That could be journaling. And I've talked with people about that on the podcast as well, people who have struggled with stuff in their life, and a massive component of healing from those challenges was some type of creation, whether it be journaling, whether it be gardening, whether it was something as simple as literally just coloring books,
sure.
something where, and I talked about this with a great guest named Josh Chuba, who he does a lot of content creation work and writing around, creativity to sort of get over chronic consumption and cheap dopamine, because our society is so just consumption driven, especially with media. And that's
Yeah.
and that's just not about like bad media, but just like good media in general as well. Like podcasts, like good books. Like when you're just constantly taking in stuff, like it just weighs you down. And like I
Hmm.
think the way that you counteract that is like, all right, if I'm constantly taking in stuff, like I need to be putting something out. And if you're taking something like out of your mind, so like sharing your thoughts, like, like when I started making videos and just like posting them on Instagram, I was like, wow, like this just feels good. Not even
Yeah.
from like the standpoint of like getting likes or like building a following or like building something. I'm just like, but having a thought and just putting out there, it's just an
Yeah.
incredible feeling. And I think there's a lot of
Absolutely.
people who have thoughts that they would love to put out there, but it can be uncomfortable
Yeah.
because, like we were saying, not a lot of people do that within a given environment. So you kind of just stay within the crowd. But like, if you put something out there, like you never know who it might help.
Oh yeah.
Like that's the biggest thing. Like that's another thing that I say. Like we all have a story that the world can benefit from hearing, and I always think we have thoughts and a way of life and things that we've experienced that we can articulate it in a way that nobody else could. And like you have no idea who you might be helping down the line by sharing that type of stuff.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, like, that's why I have just an appreciation for, what you do, what my brother does, like what all entrepreneurs do. Um, and that's also why, like, I mean, more recently, I started posting some stuff on LinkedIn because it's like, you know, I've worked at a huge company in EY, worked at a startup, a 2, 3 person startup with me included, and then now another huge company, JP Morgan. And everyone's always saying, right, like, you're at the bottom, right? Like, you gotta just do what you're told. Don't speak. Not don't speak, but like your ideas aren't as good, right?
Yeah.
Like all this stuff. And it's like, no, it actually feels good to put out content. And if you don't like that content, you don't need to follow me. You don't need to even be connected with me. But I mean, I know already just from conversations I've had that it sparked, that it's helpful to people. And maybe it's helpful in other ways that I don't even know, right? Like, so I completely, that resonates with me 100%. And then like last thing you mentioned, like not having a goal necessarily. I'm all for having strategy, but I couldn't agree more. Like, you don't need a goal if you have a good process. And I think like a really good quote, and it's ironic because like I was taking some notes down before we got on, was a quote again going back to Nike. Funny enough, but their former CEO Phil Knight, who said, "Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping until you get there, and don't give much thought to where there is. Whatever comes, just don't stop." Right. So like can't even imagine what building Nike was like because that's just a behemoth of a company and like that's just a feat in and of itself. But like the mindset of just not even caring what's ahead of you and just the storms that are about to come, and then like long nights, early wake ups, right? Like those will be there and they're going to be fun, right? But like just going and like, I think I appreciate that about what you were saying before, but B, I think it resonates with me, and I think it resonates with hopefully a lot of people. And if it doesn't, I think a lot of people need to take a second and think about that, because I think that comes down to just being present and yeah, having like self respect, honestly.
Yeah, from my own experiences and knowing how I am as a person, I know that if I'm focused on a goal or focused on me thinking, all right, how do I get over there? It just, I just go into a complete state of paralysis where then I'm not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big believer that if you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to get there, just do something. Like,
Yep.
just do something and see if it works. And if it works, great, then continue doing it. If it doesn't, all right, then pivot and you do something else. And that was me with the podcast, where I mean, I originally had the idea for the podcast when it was like almost at the end of my senior year of college, and I knew like I wasn't going to start it at that point, and I knew when, you know, I was working in real estate that I wasn't going to start it there because I was just too busy. And then when I got the new job, I was like, all right, like let me get my bearings here and then I can start it. So there was probably like a good 4 to 5 months though where I was thinking about like, oh, planning everything and like making sure like everything was perfect. And I just got into this total like mental funk and like state of paralysis where I was like, all right, like you know what you have to do, but like you're just trying to plan everything out instead of just like actually starting it. And I
Yep.
realized like it's so much easier to improve on something than it is to start something, but it's impossible to improve if you don't start the thing in the first place because then there's
Yep.
nothing to improve upon.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, I think again, like going back to development, there's no developing nothing,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, my goal, one of my goals is be like a GM of a major league team, right? And like to get there, I see myself going through an organization, right? Maybe through their like player development side of things, maybe working at the MLB one day. Who knows, right? What that path is, but like if I don't start on that path, and this could be years from now, whatever, but there is no making that happen. And yeah, just I couldn't agree more. I think that mindset of just improving and worrying about whatever consequences later is really awesome.
Yeah, I think the even bigger thing than goals, and I'll say it like, yeah, like I have goals, like I just don't try to focus on them. Like you said,
Yeah,
your thing is, you know, being a GM. Like my, I guess I would say my goal is like, all right, I'm gonna build this podcast into something where I could talk to anyone I want to in the world,
yeah,
basically,
yeah,
or you know, just very big people, and continue to build this into, you know, Outworker, not just as a podcast, but like Outworker is a brand on its own.
sure,
And I think the bigger thing than having goals or not setting goals is I never understood the mindset of having a timeline or like an endpoint for your goal. Like, all right, like this is my goal, and like I'm expecting me to be here within the next 12 to 16 months.
mm-hmm.
And from my own experience, I always thought like, how could I possibly understand or guess like where that'll be 12 to 16 months from now? And my mindset had always been like, how about I just focus on what I'm doing today and let's just see where this goes. Because I think people if they set that sort of timeline for themselves and then they get to that time, a year out or whatever, and they feel like they're not there, then it feels like, oh, well, I'm,
Yeah.
I'm behind, or, I'm failing at this.
Yep.
When in actuality, it's like, no, like you just don't understand that it may take longer than you actually thought. So you most likely probably are on the right path. And it just
Yeah.
gets to the standpoint of like, as long as you're making that daily progress, just stick to that and see where it goes.
Yep. And
That's my
and
perspective.
no, I think it's spot on. I actually just sat in on this like panel in the city, um, where it was like people within JP Morgan's startup and innovation section of their business. We're talking about like guidelines and like setting deadlines and all this stuff. And yeah, people tend to be super aggressive when they're planning for different projects and whatnot. But it's like you always have to account for some unexpected failure, or else, right? Like you're just living in this fantasy world where everything glides along without any friction and right, like that's just not ever going to be the case. So I think that's definitely a good way to think about it. I think definitely more people need to apply that to the way they operate because I think it would help a lot of different things.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, the main thing about this podcast is the relationship with yourself. And we've talked about, two big things, sort of the relationship that we have with alcohol, the relationship with, our careers and work in a professional setting, and also something that, has played into that, but like getting more so into it now, the relationship that we have with ourselves physically and our body. And I know we both, and a lot of people, they go through very physically demanding times where they're not willingly going through those stressful times. I see it as two ways where
Yeah.
you willingly put yourself through physically tough times, whether it's through working out or sports. And then there are other times where, oh, I'm really being challenged here physically and it's against my will. I think in those times, it gets really interesting how you build the relationship with yourself, at least from my experience. That's kind of where my entire understanding and philosophy behind this relationship with yourself stem from, with, my back injury that I went through a few years ago. So I'd love to hear from your standpoint on everything, just about the relationship with your body and how it plays into everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think your relationship with your body is almost everything, right? Like if you don't have a good relationship with your body, your relationship with A, other people, but B, like yourself mentally just is not there, right? I mean, like you mentioned being in times of stress or times where you're not maybe as comfortable as you'd like to be. I mean, for me, that was right. Like this past year, I was down in Richmond. I was working at EY. I was taking night classes in the fall. I ended up leaving EY. I was working at a startup, right? Night classes, assistant, like volunteering with the baseball team, like all this stuff. And you definitely, at least me, right? Like I'm tough on myself, but it starts with if you can tolerate that toughness physically that you're choosing for yourself, you could literally handle everything. Like I firmly believe that, which is why I've made an active effort to like get in the gym, get into running, like just do things that I may not be super comfortable with. Um, but I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure I know you have too, right? But like I think a lot of people just need to find that thing, whether it's running, whether it's lifting, CrossFit, whatever, that allows them to find that version of themselves.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And I feel like I got pretty lucky because I got introduced to the gym at a pretty young age. I think I started getting into the gym when I was 16, and I never had the interest or the push to do it on myself. Like, I never thought to myself, like, oh, you got to start working out or get physically fit. It was kind of going back to what I was saying about personomy and investment. It was kind of my dad saying, like, you got to start working out, and I'm going to get you a personal trainer.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of like day one getting into the gym. It was like a feeling that I had never felt before in my life. It just, things just clicked right from the start. And I kind of just stuck with it. And like you were saying, when you go through something physically demanding, it's going to go into all other areas of your life.
Oh yeah.
I think for me though, and this is something I talked about in the second episode, I think I got to a point with working out where I just got so obsessed and so deep into the rabbit hole where
Mhm.
there's good things and bad things about that because I got so obsessed
Yeah,
with
there are.
it. Because I got so obsessed with it, I stayed away from a lot of bad stuff or didn't have interest in other things that, like we were talking about, like drinking, or, I've never gotten into drugs really because I feel like I
Yeah.
had that almost euphoric experience whenever I would work out where I was
Yeah.
like, this is the thing where I'm getting my high to a certain extent. Like I said, though, I think I put so much of my identity and purpose into who I was as a person, like into my performance in the gym, that's where it um, started to hurt me a little.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until, and now getting into the aspect of going through physically demanding things unwillingly, it really wasn't until I went through my back injury where I was pretty much forced to not work out, and my identity had kind of, and like my day to day like wasn't revolving around the gym. So like I was forced to obviously go through very physically painful
Mhm.
time, but I was also like, all right, like what am I going to be doing with my days now where I don't have that sort of physical stimulus? And this is where it gets
Yeah.
into the mental creative stimulus as well. That's where I kind of picked up the slack, whether it
Yeah.
was through reading, where I got like really into poetry and like I found poems that like really connected with me about like pain and going through physically demanding times.
Mhm.
And then when I got past my back injury, it's not like I went back to that like completely obsessed, like in a rabbit hole self of just being in the gym. It was almost like I was refined where I had this very full circle relationship
Yeah.
with pushing myself physically, but also pushing myself, mentally and emotionally and creatively outside of the gym.
Sure. I mean, it sounds to me like it helped you find a little more balance because I know,
I mean, I'm still
yeah,
obsessed, but like balance, I call it like balance within obsession.
yeah. I mean, look, I think that's a really good way to talk about it. Like, I, I mean, start with this. Compared to other people, I think I have a relationship with fitness where it's, I know I will do it and I'm not ever afraid that I'm going to become inactive. But I now, at this point in my life, have a relationship where I'm, I don't want to say easy on myself, right? But flexible because before I never was. Like, I was so structured, so regimented. And look, for some people, that's a really, really good thing. But I think if you become too structured, too regimented, too obsessed, it trickles into all aspects of your life. And I think that's what I found for me was bad that stemmed from that. So now, right, like if I, for example, right, like if I had work and didn't get back from the city until whatever, 11 or 12, right, like, and I had to be in the city the next day at 7:30 or 8, right, like, yeah, maybe I'd work out in the morning at whatever. But if I got home and had to do work and had to be up until 2 in the morning, like, I would be fine now. Whereas like a year or 2 years ago, I'd be like, no, dude, you got to go to the gym. Like, what are you doing? Right. Like, there's
Yeah.
time to make up that quote unquote like missed day or the slack. Because like you said, like there's other aspects to being a human, right? Like that mental, emotional, all of it, right? Like, so it's finding that balance for me anyway of like full circle view of me that has allowed me to be more comfortable with like not being so strict about it. But I think balance within obsession is a really good way to think about it. And to be honest, like that could very well be like, I don't want to say a motto or a slogan for that worker, right? But it's like kind of got me thinking a little bit.
There's another guy that I love. His name's Zach Pogrob, who does a lot of writing and social media work, and he's pretty much branded himself around this word obsession. Like he's known as
Yep.
like the guy who's obsessed. And he has this very interesting way of looking at things where within obsession there's sort of three different people within that, where it's the artist, it's the athlete, and it's the businessman. And I think that's kind of where I get my understanding of having that balance within obsession, where obsession is a great thing, but I think if you're obsessed just within one of those components, that's where it can start to hurt you more than help you. But if you have this sort of trio of people within yourself where it's the artist, the athlete, and the businessman, and you're obsessed within all those three people, that's when it can really help you. And I was the same way where, there was a point in my life for a very long time where going to the gym was like the best part of my day. Like, which is a great thing. Like to be like, I love going to the gym. I'm in a place now though where, and it's awesome, and I thought I would never get to this spot where going to the gym just feels like a part of my day. Where it's
Yeah.
like, this is a thing that I do. Like I like doing it, but it's not like my entire day. Like I still spend probably too much time in the gym, and like I know like as time goes on this year, like and as I get older, like I don't want to be spending as much time in the gym
Sure.
as I am right now. But what personal growth looked like for me, and you've talked about it with like development, what personal development looked like for me, and I feel like for a lot of people it's the opposite, but for me, what personal development looked like was not being so focused on fitness and
Yep.
not being so focused on, this whole mindset of, oh, I got to get bigger, I got to get stronger, and just having a more balanced approach of working out is something that I do, and it's not
Yeah.
who I am as a person.
Yeah. I think that detachment from identity is massive. Um, and one thing that's definitely helped me. And I think being able to, and I think you said it, Zach. I definitely have seen that guy. I haven't been on Instagram in a while. Zach Podgrub. I just looked him up. But I think having like those segments, if you will, of like who you are is huge. And yeah, like just having it be part of your day as opposed to like what drives your day. I mean, look, whatever works, but like, yeah, I think how you think
I mean,
about
it's
it is a
easy for me
big
to
way.
say that now. Like, it's easy for me to say, like, after I feel like I've, gotten great results from the gym, it's easy for me
Yeah,
to say it in hindsight. Like, oh, like, don't have the gym be as important, or like I like that the gym isn't as important, because I feel like, people say like we go through seasons. Like there was a point in my life where, and I was a young kid, so I was able to put as much focus. Like I think if you're a young kid who's like between, let's say, 16 and college years, like if you're like a person like me who is like, I am just fully obsessed with like this lifestyle, and like this is all that matters to me, I think to a certain extent that's completely fine, because that's going to keep you out of other stuff that may do more harm than you. I think as you mature, though, I think you kind of just naturally see like, okay, there's other important stuff that is going to allow for a better life, if than just being completely consumed by this one component of life.
Yeah. No, I think, and kind of moving slightly away from just the gym, but like I think balance for me has been big in a lot of different aspects because I think it's easy to move a million miles per hour in the direction that seems like it is most helpful right now, when in reality, like you just said, right? Like the gym's going to be a part of your life, my life for the rest of our lives, right? Like it's important for me to, because at times, like too obsessed is definitely too obsessed, and it removes aspects of your life that are super important. Like for me, I know like family is super important to me. Friends are super important to me. And when I get super enthralled in something that is not tied into those other values in my life, it takes away from like who I truly am, if that makes sense. Um, so I think it's important to be able to like, and I actually just had this type of conversation the other day with the guy I work with, but like to be able to take a step back, evaluate things at a higher level, and say, right, like here's where I'm at. Maybe, these are the areas that are more important at the moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's definitely something that I struggle with. And I know when I talked with your brother, it was something that he kind of said he struggles with as well. When you can just go so deep down one path that you just have this tunnel vision, and that's probably the thing that I struggle with the most, just having that balance. And I think it gets within discipline. We always think of discipline as like have the discipline to do the thing, like buckle up and like do the thing. I think for people who are very disciplined and are very driven, and you know have different work or just different projects that they're focused on, you also have to see discipline as having the discipline to step away from the thing at times and
Yeah.
let yourself breathe, and like you were saying, focus on those other components that make you who you truly are. And yeah, I think when you become just so obsessed with something, and that's the only thing that you focus on, and this is something that I probably struggle with the most, you kind of have diminishing returns on it.
And for me, like the biggest thing was finding something else. Like my obsession my whole life was baseball, right? And then like all of a sudden baseball was gone. I tried to find other ways to tie baseball into my life that wasn't playing, right? So like I still give baseball lessons and like coach, and right, I'm moving to Hoboken in like a week, and I'm gonna try to stay involved, hopefully through like Stevens and that program, and like just again developing in ways that maybe it's not the same vehicle, but the destination and the path is the same. I think that's been key for me.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess just one last point I'll say on this, just to like,
Yeah,
not to play devil's advocate, but just to
no,
bring more color. I do think there are parts in your life where to get something off the ground, or when you're in that sort of beginning foundation stage, I think you do have to be all in, and that's like what your main focus goes to. And then once it starts to be built and starts to flourish a little, then that's when you can kind of play around with other components. But I think within that building stage, like you have to be focused on building, and you really can't be like
Absolutely.
building other stuff, because like when I think also part of the reason why I stopped having such a obsessed focus over working out is because with this podcast, like that's where my mindset and energy went into, where I'm like, all right, I'm going to shift my sort of like building mentality over to the podcast. And like with working out, like that's kind of going to be put on cruise control to a certain extent.
Sure.
Chris, you have been my longest guest by about 25 minutes, and it's been an incredible
I'm
conversation.
honored.
It feels like we've only been talking for like 15 minutes here. What's the I've never done this with a guest, but like what's the one overarching point that you'd want to leave people with?
I think it's a tough question.
It's a
Um,
loaded question. You gave me
it
a
is a
loaded
loaded
question,
question.
so I'm
Yeah,
going to
no,
give you
you're
a loaded
firing
question
it right
back.
back from the hip. I love it. I would say, like, honestly, and this is speaking from experience, because, like I said, I'm a little too hard on myself at times, but I'm the first one to make a joke. Like, make what you're doing, whether it's you're building something, you're just working towards something, make it fun. Don't take yourself too seriously, and like stay true to yourself. And I think you're always going to find yourself on a path to success if you're doing those things.
Yeah, I love that. What I always tell myself is take what you do seriously, but don't take yourself seriously at all.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Chris, appreciate you for coming on the show.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me, Tim. This is a blast.